Saint François de Laval was a French Catholic prelate who served as Apostolic Vicar of New France from 1658 to 1674, and as Bishop of Quebec from 1674 until he retired due to poor health in 1688. He continued to work in New France until his death in 1708.
François de Laval, the disputed bishopric. The Jesuits, then as now, were the most forcible exponents of the Church to rule the world, the Pope to rule the Church, the Jesuits to rule the Pope. Such was and is the simple program of the Order of Jesus, and to it they have held fast, except on a few rare occasions of misunderstanding with the Vice-Regent of Christ. In the question of papal supremacy, as in most things, François de Laval was of one mind with them. Those versed in such histories will not be surprised to learn that when he received the royal nomination, humility would not permit him to accept it, nor that, being urged, he at length bowed in resignation, still protesting his unworthiness. Nevertheless, the royal nomination did not take effect. Instead of appointing him Bishop of Quebec in accordance with the royal initiative, the Pope made him his Vicar Apostolic for Canada, thus evading the King's nomination and affirming that Canada, a country of infidels, was excluded from the Concordat, and under his, the Pope's jurisdiction, pure and simple. Enraged, the Archbishop of Rouen vainly opposed, and the parliaments of Rouen and of Paris vainly protested. The papal party prevailed. The king, or rather Mazarin, gave his consent, subject to certain conditions, the chief of which was an oath of allegiance, and Laval, Grand Vicar Apostolic, decorated with the title of Bishop of Petrea, sailed for his wilderness diocese in the spring of 1669. He was but 36 years of age. Monsieur l'Abbé de Queylus, for a time, seemed to accept the situation, and tacitly admit the claim of Laval as his ecclesiastical superior. But stimulated by a letter from the Archbishop of Rouen, he soon threw himself into an attitude of opposition, in which the popularity which his generosity to the poor had won for him gave him an advantage very annoying to his adversary. The quarrel was Sulpician against Jesuit, Montreal against Quebec. To Montreal the recalcitrant abbé, after a brief visit to Quebec, had again retired, but even here, with his Sulpician brethren and compassed with partisans, the arm of the Vicar Apostolic was long enough to reach him. By temperament and conviction, Laval hated a divided authority, and the very shadow of a schism was an abomination in his sight. The young king, who, though abundantly jealous of his royal power, was forced to conciliate the papal party, had sent instructions to the governor to support Laval and prevent divisions in the Canadian Church. These instructions served as the pretext of a procedure sufficiently summary. A squad of soldiers, commanded, it is said, by the governor himself, went up to Montreal, brought the indignant Queylus to Quebec, and shipped him thence for France. By these means, order reigned for a season in the Church. It was but for a season. Queylus was not a man to bide his defeat in tranquillity, nor were his brother Sulpicians disposed to silent acquiescence. Laval, on his part, was not a man of half measures. He had an agent in France, and partisans strong at court. Fearing that the return of Queylus to Canada would prove injurious to the glory of God, he bestirred himself to prevent it. The young king, on his famous journey to the frontiers of Spain to marry the Infanta, was induced to write to Queylus, ordering him to remain in France. Queylus, however, repaired to Rome, but even against this movement provision had been made. Accusations had gone before him, and he met a cold welcome. Nevertheless, as he had powerful friends near the Pope, he succeeded in removing these adverse impressions and even in obtaining certain bulls relating to the establishment of the parish of Montreal and favourable to the Sulpicians. Provided with these, he set at naught the king's letter, embarked under an assumed name, and sailed to Quebec, where he made his appearance on the 3rd of August, 1661, to the extreme wrath of Laval. A ferment ensued. Laval's partisans charged the Sulpicians with opposition to the will of the Pope. A preacher more zealous than the rest denounced them as priests of Antichrist, and as to the bulls in their favour, it was affirmed that Quelos had obtained them by fraud from the Holy Father. Laval at once issued a mandate forbidding him to proceed to Montreal till ships should arrive with instructions from the king. At the same time, he demanded of the governor that he should interpose the civil power to prevent Quelos from leaving Quebec. The governor, who wished to act as peacemaker between the belligerent fathers, did not at once take the sharp measures required of him. Laval renewed his demand on the next day, calling on him in the name of God and the king to compel Quelos to yield the obedience due to him, the Vicar Apostolic. At the same time, he sent another to the offending abbé, threatening to suspend him from priestly functions if he persisted in his rebellion. The incorrigible Quelos, who seemed to have lived for some months in a simmer of continual indignation, set at naught the Vicar Apostolic as he had set at naught the king, took a boat that very night, and set out for Montreal under cover of darkness. Great was the ire of Laval when he heard the news in the morning. He dispatched a letter after him, declaring him suspended ipso facto if he did not instantly return and make his submission. This letter, like the rest, failed of the desired effect, but the governor, who had received a second mandate from the king to support Laval and prevent a schism, now reluctantly interposed the secular arm, and Quelos was again compelled to return to France. His expulsion was a Sulpician defeat. Laval, always zealous for unity and centralization, had some time before taken steps to repress what he regarded as a tendency to independence at Montreal. In the preceding year he had written to the Pope, "There are some secular priests, Sulpicians at Montreal, whom the Abbé de Quelos brought out with him in 1667, and I have named for the functions of curé the one among them whom I thought the least disobedient." The bulls which Quelos had obtained from Rome related to this very curacy, and greatly disturbed the mind of the Vicar Apostolic. He accordingly wrote again to the Pope, "I pray your Holiness to let me know your will concerning the jurisdiction of the Archbishop of Rouen. Monsieur l'Abbé de Quelos, who has come out this year as vicar of this archbishop, has tried to deceive us by surreptitious letters, and has obeyed neither our prayers nor our repeated commands to desist. But he has received orders from the king to return immediately to France, to render an account of his disobedience, and he has been compelled by the governor to conform to the will of his majesty. What I now fear is that on his return to France, by using every kind of means, employing new artifices, and falsely representing our affairs, he may obtain from the court of Rome powers which may disturb the peace of our church. For the priests whom he brought with him from France, and who live at Montreal, are animated with the same spirit of disobedience and division, and I fear, with good reason, that all belonging to the seminary of St. Sulpice, who may come hereafter to join them, will be of the same disposition. If what is said is true, that by means of fraudulent letters the right of patronage of the pretended parish of Montreal has been granted to the superior of this seminary, and the right of appointment to the Archbishop of Rouen, Then is altar reared against altar in our Church of Canada, for the clergy of Montreal will always stand in opposition to me, the Vicar Apostolic, and to my successors. These dismal forebodings were never realized. The Holy See annulled the obnoxious bulls. The Archbishop of Rouen renounced his claims, and Caylus found his position untenable. 7 years later, when Laval was on a visit to France, a reconciliation was brought about between them. The former vicar of the Archbishop of Rouen made his submission to the vicar of the Pope and returned to Canada as a missionary. Laval's triumph was complete, to the joy of the Jesuits, silent if not idle, spectators of the tedious and complex quarrel of the disputed bishopric. Jesuit Laval triumphant.
Laval University in Quebec City traces its roots to the Quebec Seminary founded by François de Laval in 1663, making it the oldest institution of higher education in Canada and the first North American institution to offer higher education in French. The city of Laval is the largest suburb of Montreal, the third largest city in the province after Montreal and Quebec City, and the 13th largest city in Canada. I'm Mark Vinette, and I hope you're enjoying the ride.